Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to cover one last thing that somebody can do to you if they are coming at you from like a perk or a modern move order. In this case, it's specifically going to be the modern move order. It's going to happen after e4, and then they're going to play pawn to g6, and you're going to play d4, and they're going to play c6. So this has its own special name. This is called, in America for years, I think we were calling it the g6 Caro hybrid, which is just kind of a silly name. Kind of like the way we call the Scandinavian opening the center counter, although I think the Scandinavian has pretty much taken over as the official name now. But in, I think, everywhere else, they call this the Gurgenidze opening. And actually, it's kind of an interesting opening to play against. I ran into this quite often when I played chess in Minnesota. There was a player there by the name of Alex Blandon that played this quite frequently. So I had to have some preparation to play against Blandon. And of course, the nice thing about playing against Blandon was he was so very consistent with his openings that you could, prepare lines very deeply against what he played. And so I got a chance to learn a lot about this opening. And I think when most players face this opening for the first or even the second or third time, it's really kind of surprising, and it comes as a shock, and it's kind of jarring, and they're not really sure what the best line is to play against it, because it is kind of a weird line to play against. So after you play something like knight c3, a very common move here is something like d5, just striking at the middle immediately. And this makes life kind of awkward for white. It also makes life kind of awkward for white if white likes to take up like an Austrian attack setup, with e5 and f4, because these setups aren't always ideal in these types of circumstances, because if you just gain space in these positions with moves like e5, then black is likely to, especially if you've played f4, there are people that will actually play pawn to f4 in these positions, and in these cases, I think something like d5, e5, and then say h5, with the idea of finishing development with knight h6 and bishop g4 followed by e6. Basically, what black's trying to do is he's trying to play a really good French, where he's managed to commit your center pawns all the dark squares, and he's managed to get rid of his light squared bishop, and he's just going to try to play a really good French defense with the black pieces. And this isn't something that's ideal for you if you're playing white. You'd rather make him play something a little bit inferior to this. I'm not saying that white's position is necessarily bad in these positions. I mean, just getting the light squared bishop off the board, I don't think is quite enough for black to equalize, in the face of just having less space. But at the same time, I feel like we should be asking for more in these positions, considering what black is basically trying to do here. So what we should be doing is we should be playing knight c3, and then on d5, what I've discovered is kind of the best strategy, instead of something like e5 and f4, is we should just kind of maintain our center so that we can continue to put pressure on d5 and try to get black to exchange. Now, that doesn't mean that we won't eventually push this pawn if we need to, or if black does nothing, or if black continues to play kind of goofy moves. But it does mean that we're just going to kind of maintain this position for a little while longer. So my personal favorite move is just to play pawn to h3. This is because I actually intend the move knight to f3, and I don't want it to be harangued by this light squared bishop. So this is one of the things that I think is the basic principle behind this position for white, is that what black is basically doing in these positions is he's planting all of his pawns on light squares. And he actually intends to plant this one on a light square as well, in a lot of cases, and then somehow trade off this light squared bishop and plant the rest of his pawns on light squares. Sometimes they'll even follow up with b5. They'll just put every single pawn in their camp on a light square. And then, of course, they don't need a light squared bishop. A light squared bishop is a liability, so they're trying to get rid of it. So my main goal, from just a very basic positional standpoint, is restrict this bishop. Don't give this bishop a place to go. Make sure that this bishop can't go here and here. If they're going to be planting all of their pawns on light squares before we've determined the middle of the board, we need to let them know that there isn't going to be a good place to place that bishop. That they're going to be stuck with this bishop. They can have all their pawns on light squares, but they're going to be stuck with this bishop, and that's the end of the story. So h3, and then they're going to play bishop g7, we're going to play knight f3. Now at this point, there are quite a few players that'll just kind of give up the ghost, and they're going to play something like d takes e5. And then after, say, d takes c5, knight takes e5, they might even just play something like knight f6, bishop f6. And then this position should just be generally considered just slight edge white. We have a reasonable position. We can finish our development here. You could have reached this position out of any number of different openings. Like you could have reached this out of a Bern variation of the French, would give you a very similar structure, although in that case the pawn would be on e6 instead of c6, but it's a very similar structure. So you should have stuff like this in your repertoire already. If you play anything against if you play knight c3 against the French, you've already got this in your repertoire, or something similar to it. Now, you could also have gotten this position out of something like a Scandinavian. You basically can't avoid this structure. So you're good to go here. White's got a slight advantage and can just kind of play just from here. So the thing that people try to do is they try to maintain this tension and they try to keep things kind of goofy. They usually try to play this move knight h6. So their idea is they want to play knight h6, they want to play f6, they want to bring the knight back to f7, and then they want to play e5. And this seems convoluted, and that's because it is. It's a very convoluted plan, but it's also a very difficult plan to meet. And you have to actually meet it correctly. It's not something that you can just ignore and hope that it goes away. You actually have to do something. Now, in this particular case, what I'm going to recommend is I'm going to recommend my moves instead of like the well-trodden paths that have been played previously. Because, I had the benefit of playing against Alex Blandon a few times, and I had the benefit of knowing almost exactly what path he was going to go down, and I was able to, in some cases, get some large advantages out of the opening against him. And I believe it was just from this experience, and that means that I don't necessarily just have to follow the main line that the top guy that played this position with white played. So after bishop to d3, which I feel is the best move, castles kingside, and then let's just say the main move here is castles kingside. This is what the top guys do. This was actually a Kopian versus Feuser. And if you want to follow this move, castles kingside, go ahead. But again, like I said, I prefer something different. Now, this is just the more traditional way to play it. You just castle kingside, and after f6, you play something like knight e2, knight f7, and then you simply exchange, and you play c4. And this position is supposed to be slight edge white. It's not enough for me, though. And I feel like, again, white can get more. Now, I'm sure that Akopian had some preparation on this, but, I mean, he didn't need a ton of it. He was just kind of shocked by this opening, and he came up with something, and it was good enough to beat the opponent he was playing at the time. I think the move bishop to f4 is actually a much stronger move. Now, the whole point is I actually intend to meet the move f6 with the move e5, which means I'm just stopping e5 altogether. I just don't want them to play it, period. And my intention is, my personal intention, although other people have played this opening, this was actually played between Guliev and Mikolavsky in Baku in 2009. Now that game went down a slightly different path. That game went down the path of knight f5, and then that game continued with knight e2, c5 castles, knight c6, rook e1. But white was decidedly better in this particular game. Like, white actually came out on top. So Guliev came out on top and won that game in Baku against Mikolavsky in 2009. So this isn't something that we should be worried about playing as white. We should actually be okay with this. White's got a really solid position with the white pieces here. Just e6, rook a1, everything is centralized, and black's got some weaknesses on the dark squares. White has a little bit more space. White has good posts for his pieces. This bishop can go into g4. This knight can tuck in behind with f4. We've got a great position. So white ended up doing really good in that game, and I think this is a perfectly reasonable way to play if they play knight f5. The other thing they can do here is they can play knight f7. This is the move that I ran into more often. Now here, I'm not going to recommend the previous paths of other strong players. I'm just going to recommend what I did, which is just queen e2. My intention is to castle queenside and play h4, h5, and play for mate. And I don't know how black responds to this, to be completely honest. So, like, after, say, queen a5, we can just castle queenside, and after b5, we really don't care about b4. If they want the pawn on a2, fine. It takes a lot of tempo to take that pawn on a2. We can just play h4 and start playing for mate. As a matter of fact, when they play b4, we don't even care about the knight. We can just play h5 and just play for mate. And white should just be winning in these positions. White's attack is coming first. I'll just give, like, a for instance. So, like, let's say they take the knight. We take here. So we've already got like a huge number of threats in this position. Like we've got this threat, we've got this threat, we've got rook takes h7 as a threat. There's a lot of threats. Now you might be saying, well, doesn't black have some threats as well, like maybe coming in for mate or trying something? Well, for starters, c takes b2 isn't a threat because the attack would abruptly stop after, say, king b1. And black just isn't bringing enough ammunition to the party to change what's happening on this king side very, very rapidly. So we're not worried about cb2 because after king b1, the attack ends. So the only move we'd really have to worry about is maybe something like queen to b4, where he's threatening queen to b2. But we're going to take this knight on f7 first. They're going to take back with the king. And now, okay, we're getting mated, so we got to do something. So we got to take that pawn. They're not going to mate us with just a queen. So they can't mate you with just one piece. They need another piece. So they're going to take with the queen, and they're threatening what? They're threatening a check on a1. We go to d2, and then there's nothing. So now it's our turn to basically just attack and do what we want. And it turns out we have a really strong attacking idea here. And stop and pause the video and see if you can find it. Now, if you found it, congratulations. I mean, you're basically like a grandmaster level attacker. So the idea is e6 check. Bishop takes e6, and then you should play knight g5 check. This is, I think it's kind of hard to see, but, you know, for us players that really like attacking, you noted probably these themes right away with all of this stuff coming in. And yes, we can give up that knight on g5 to come in with all this stuff. And we're going to be completely winning. At this point, they really shouldn't take the knight, but of course if they move the king away, we're taking that bishop for free. And as I pointed out before, black has nothing as far as an attack goes. He has one check followed by having to move his queen again without check. So that's not something that black even really wants here. So let's just say f takes g5. We have queen h5 check is going to be completely winning. The point is, king to f6, we're going to have bishop e5 is going to be mate. And it's going to be mate on e5 regardless, actually. Even if he finds the correct move, which is the only move, king g8, we're mating in, just 3 more moves. Queen h7, king f7, bishop g6, king e5, bishop e5, mate. So this is the idea. You play bishop f4, and I think this is just an improvement on the theory. You play bishop f4. After f6, you play e5. And then after knight f7, you just simply play queen e2, you castle queenside, and you just play for mate. You play h4, h5. And you don't really care about the material on the queenside, and you don't really care what's going on the queenside, because you're just basically playing for mate in this position. And, I mean, to be honest, your attack just should come first, and why shouldn't it? You have more development, you have a better center, you have more space. Black's entire queenside is undeveloped because he spent all of this time playing g6, f6, knight h6 to f7, in the hopes to play e5, which you effectively shut down. That's a lot of moves, especially when you're playing the black pieces, and I feel totally justified in just trying to refute this setup by force. And even though it hasn't really been played all that much in the past, this idea with bishop f4, e5, followed by queen e2 and castles queenside, the computer backs it up, and the computer thinks that this is the best way to play. So if somebody does this against you, have a little bit of preparation under your belt just in case. I know that, facing this particular setup might be like a 1 in 1,000 thing, but if you've got a player in your area that plays this as their specialty weapon, it's worth the time to put in and learn this particular variation so that you can get a decisive advantage with the white pieces very easily and go on to win. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and thank you very much for watching.